Most people who leave a narcissist spend months thinking about how to make them pay. What they don't realize is that the one thing that truly damages a narcissist has nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with something far quieter, far more permanent, and far more devastating to everything they are built from. There is a particular kind of pain that the narcissistic personality structure is uniquely, almost exquisitely vulnerable to, and it is not the pain of being confronted. It is not the pain of being exposed, argued with, publicly contradicted, or dramatically rejected. All of those experiences, however unpleasant their surface presentation, share a quality that the narcissist's internal system can work with. They all confirm something fundamental, that the narcissist matters enough to provoke a strong response, that they occupy enough psychological real estate in another person's life to generate heat, energy, and emotional investment. What the narcissist cannot work with, what their psychological architecture has no reliable mechanism for processing, is irrelevance. Not anger, not hatred, not the dramatic declaration of never wanting to see them again, which still carries the emotional charge of someone who is deeply affected, but the specific, quiet, undramatic experience of simply no longer registering as significant in someone's internal world, of being thought about neither with warmth nor with bitterness, of existing in another person's daily psychological life as nothing in particular. What most people don't realize is how completely the narcissist's entire sense of self depends on occupying significant space in the minds of the people they have touched. Not necessarily positive space. Negative attention, conflict, and emotional distress serve the same fundamental function as admiration and affection. All of it confirms the same thing, that they are significant, that they have impact, that their existence registers in the experience of others with enough force to produce a reaction. This is where the irrelevance wound cuts deepest, because it doesn't attack the narcissist's image, their reputation, or their narrative. It attacks the foundational assumption beneath all of those things. The assumption that they matter enough to be affected by. Pay attention to what this reveals about the common impulse toward revenge. Because revenge, however understandable its emotional logic, is perhaps the most generous gift a former target can offer a narcissist. At the moment of departure, it requires sustained emotional investment. It requires that significant mental and psychological energy continue to be organized around the narcissist's existence. It requires, at the most fundamental level, that the narcissist remain central to the former target's internal world, which is precisely the condition the narcissist's psychology depends on to function. This is exactly what they want you to believe, is power. That pursuing revenge represents strength, agency, and the reclamation of what was taken. But the hidden reason behind why revenge backfires reveals something the narcissist would never want you to understand. Every hostile message, every public exposure attempt, every calculated move designed to make them feel what they made you feel, all of it is supply differently packaged than admiration, but functionally identical in what it provides. Your continued emotional engagement, delivered directly to the one place it does the most damage to your own departure. Most people miss this warning sign because revenge feels like action. And in the aftermath of narcissistic abuse, the desire for action, for some form of agency after months or years of having agency systematically removed, is entirely understandable. But action aimed at the narcissist is still action organized around the narcissist. And organization around the narcissist was always the dynamic they were most invested in preserving. There is a quality that former targets occasionally develop. Not immediately, not through a single decision, but gradually through the natural process of rebuilding a life that was organized around something other than the narcissist's needs, that functions as the most psychologically disruptive force the narcissist will ever encounter from someone they have been involved with. It is not performed coldness. It is not strategic distance. It is not the carefully maintained no contact of someone who is white, knuckling their way through the absence of engagement while remaining deeply emotionally invested in the narcissist's response to that absence. It is genuine indifference. And the difference between the performed version and the authentic one is something the narcissist, despite all their tactical sophistication, can detect with uncomfortable accuracy. What most people don't realize is that the narcissist has spent the entire relationship developing a detailed functional map of your emotional interior, knowing which approaches produce warmth, which produce guilt, which produce anger, and how each of those responses can be leveraged. This map is their primary tactical resource. And genuine indifference doesn't simply make the map less useful. It makes the map obsolete. Because the map was always drawn in emotional ink, every coordinate defined by your reactions, your investments, your continued capacity to be affected. Authentic indifference erases those coordinates entirely. The approaches that previously produced guilt now land on nothing. The provocations that reliably generated anger now meet silence that carries no suppressed heat beneath it. The overtures that once reopened emotional access now find a door that isn't locked, simply no longer oriented in their direction. This is where the thriving threat enters. Pay attention to what a former target's visible flourishing actually communicates to the narcissist, not as an intentional message, but as an unavoidable one. That the relationship's ending did not diminish them. That what the narcissist believed was damage was actually liberation. And that the narrative of the narcissist's indispensability, quietly maintained throughout the entire dynamic, has been exposed without a single confrontational word, as precisely what it always was. There is something that happens inside the narcissist's psychological system when every form of engagement has been withdrawn. Not just the warm engagement, not just the positive supply of admiration and affection, but all of it. The hostile engagement, the defensive engagement, the periodic checking, the occasional response, the small reactions that signal continued emotional investment, even when they are intended to communicate the opposite. When all of it stops, when the supply line is genuinely, completely, and sustainably severed, what emerges in the narcissist is not grief in any recognizable form. It is something more structurally significant than grief. It is drought. What most people don't realize is that the narcissist's internal world has no reliable self-sustaining mechanism for generating the psychological resources it requires to function. Most people, in the ordinary course of daily life, produce their sense of worth, significance, and emotional stability from a combination of internal and external sources, private values, meaningful work, genuine relationships, the quiet continuity of a self that exists independently of moment-to-moment external confirmation. The narcissist's internal architecture never developed this self-generating capacity. The supply was never supplementary. It was structural. And when it stops arriving from all directions simultaneously, the system begins experiencing something it is fundamentally not equipped to manage independently. Pay attention to what this supply drought produces in observable behavior, because it follows a predictable sequence that becomes visible once you know what you are looking for. First, escalation. More frequent contact attempts, more varied approaches, a cycling through methods with increasing urgency as each one fails to restore the connection. Then, when escalation produces nothing, a pivot to whatever approach has historically worked most reliably with this particular target: vulnerability. If vulnerability once reopened doors, anger, if anger once generated the engagement of defensive response, nostalgia, if nostalgia once softened the resolve that was building. And when none of these approaches produce results, when the drought persists through all of them, something shifts in the narcissist's behavior that is more revealing than any of the preceding attempts they perform moving on. Publicly, visibly, with a speed and completeness that seems designed to be noticed by the one person who is no longer paying attention. This performance is not moving on. It is a transmission. And the fact that it requires an audience, that it is executed in spaces where the former target might observe it, reveals that the drought has not been resolved. It has simply changed the method being used to end it. This is where the replacement that doesn't register produces its most psychologically significant impact. Because at some point in this sequence, the narcissist encounters a reality that revenge could never create and confrontation could never deliver. The discovery that the former target has genuinely rebuilt, not as a performance of recovery designed to provoke a reaction, not as a strategic display of happiness calculated to communicate something to the narcissist, but as the quiet, authentic result of a life that reorganized itself around its own center, rather than around the narcissist's gravitational pull. The hidden reason behind why this is so devastating to the narcissist connects to the foundational belief that their personality structure depends on the belief that their impact on people is permanent. That what they created in the relationship, whatever its nature, left a mark that continues to organize the former target's experience long after the relationship ended. This belief serves a crucial function. It maintains the narcissist's sense of significance in the absence of active supply. Even without current engagement, they can locate themselves in the former target's ongoing emotional life, as a presence felt in the difficulty of moving on, in the comparison of new relationships to the old, in the way the experience of the relationship continues to cast its shadow forward. The former target, who genuinely rebuilds, dismantles this belief without a single confrontational act. Their thriving is not a message to the narcissist, but it is received as a message that cuts through every defensive reframe, every narrative revision, every superiority performance that the narcissist has deployed in the aftermath. It communicates quietly and irrefutably that the impact was not permanent, that the shadow did not extend as far as the narcissist needed it to, that the person they were certain remained organized around their existence has simply and completely become organized around something else entirely. Most people miss this warning sign, or rather, most people don't realize that their own genuine recovery is simultaneously the most psychologically disruptive thing they could ever produce in the narcissist who harmed them. Not because it was designed to be, but because the narcissist system registers it as exactly what it is, evidence that they were not, in the end, as indispensable as they required themselves to be. When you examine the complete picture, the irrelevance wound that cuts deeper than any confrontation, the way revenge restores exactly what departure was designed to remove, the tactical dismantling that genuine indifference produces, the supply drought that no internal resource can independently resolve, the memory distortion that activates when re-engagement permanently fails, and the quiet devastation of an ending so complete it left nothing to negotiate. What emerges is a portrait of a psychological system that was always far more fragile than its performance suggested. This is the hidden reason that the one thing hurting a narcissist more than revenge has nothing to do with retaliation and everything to do with removal. Complete, authentic, undramatic removal. Not as a strategy, not as a calculated move designed to produce a specific reaction, but as the natural consequence of a person who has genuinely redirected the full weight of their psychological attention away from the narcissist and back toward their own life. What most people don't realize is that this outcome, the quiet, complete, and genuine departure of someone's emotional investment, is the one scenario the narcissist's entire behavioral architecture was designed to prevent. Every tactic discussed throughout this video, from the initial idealization, to the re-engagement attempts, to the memory revision, to the public performance of moving on. All of it was organized around a single objective: keeping the former target emotionally engaged, keeping the connection, in whatever form was available, alive enough to be leveraged. Revenge keeps it alive. Confrontation keeps it alive. Public exposure attempts keep it alive. Even the most hostile forms of continued engagement keep it alive. Because life, in any form, is preferable to the narcissist system over the specific experience of genuine psychological death in someone else's interior world. Pay attention to what this reveals about where actual power in these dynamics was always located. Not in the narcissist's tactical sophistication, not in their ability to read and respond to emotional reactions, not in the elaborate systems of control and supply extraction they spent the entire relationship maintaining. The power was always in the attention, and the attention always belonged to the person providing it. The moment that person genuinely reclaims their attention, not as a tactic, not as a performance of indifference designed to produce a reaction, but as the authentic result of a life rebuilt around something other than the narcissist's existence, the entire power dynamic inverts completely and permanently. The narcissist, deprived of the one resource their system cannot generate independently, encounters an experience that no amount of tactical sophistication can navigate around. The experience of someone for whom they are simply no longer relevant. Not hated, not feared, not missed with the kind of intensity that keeps a connection alive beneath the surface of its apparent ending. Simply no longer relevant. This is exactly what they want you to believe is impossible. That someone who was that significant, who occupied that much psychological space, who shaped that much of your daily experience could ever become genuinely irrelevant to you. But the hidden reason this is the one thing that hurts them most is precisely because it is possible. And when it happens, quietly, completely, and without announcement, the narcissist finally encounters the one experience their entire life was constructed to avoid: the world continuing. Without them at the center of it,